Captain. Oops, never flown one of these. Don't push that, you idiot. That jettisons the fuel. Don't ever call me an idiot. You want to go? You want to do this right here?
How's it going, Coach? Good. Want you to meet your new star running back.
Son, our future is in your hands.
So let's get you checked out here. You say it's the leg here, and oh dear, yeah, that's the lump. Wow, that's cancer. That's gross. What's your schedule look like? We're probably gonna need to amputate today. Do you have a will?
That's my cell phone. I'm here for a flu shot.
Wow, close call. You are lucky to be alive. Let's get that flu shot taken care of. Okay.
Yeah, we're trying out a new small group. I'll talk to you later.
Kill them all, as soon as they come in.
He's dead. Let's get rid of him. Oh, hey guys, come on in. A little bit of a fly problem.
Hey, you guys, welcome to our small group. Come on in.
Okay, what not to do and what to do when you enter a small group. We're in John chapter 2 today, and today it reads in John chapter 2, verse 11, the last verse we're dealing with, or the next to last verse we're dealing with, it says, "This beginning of signs Jesus did at Cana in Galilee." The beginning of signs, the rollout, the first sign, the first thing, first impressions are important. And this is the first impression a lot of people have of Jesus Christ, and it's the first impression that John's going to present to people and say, this is who the Messiah is. A couple weeks ago, we looked at the first part of chapter 1, and it dealt with, Jesus was the Word, He's the light, He's the life, and so forth. This is John speaking. Then last, we looked at the second part of chapter 1, and in the second part of chapter 1, it talked about different people that testified or verified Jesus' deity and who He was and the impressions they had of Him. First of all, it was John the Baptist and the two disciples and then Nathaniel. And now today, we have them going to a wedding, and here is the first impression of what we call signs. It's the first sign He did. And if you look in chapter 20, and again, take your Bibles, because you're going to need your Bibles as we go through here, but John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, the very end of His book, He says these things. "Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in His name." So He wrote these particular signs, picked the ones, and there's 8 of them here in the book of John, along with 6 I Ams and a few other important parts and so forth as we look through this. He picked out these particular signs to be able to prove and demonstrate that Jesus Christ was God. Now, the other synoptics, they were basically a narrative, like a history. Let's go through, and Jesus did this today and that tomorrow, and it's all chronological and so forth. And John is mostly chronological, but John's purpose was not to give the narrative and the story of Jesus' life or ministry here on earth, like Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Each of those had different aspects they emphasized. But John is written in more of a theological sense and more of a basic starter sense, so that anybody can look at it and understand Jesus Christ is God. He's the Son of God. And that's what John's trying to show through this. So today is the first of, 8 signs that eventually will come in as we study the book of John and go through it. He also wrote in the very end, the last verse of the book, it says this, "And there are also many other things or signs which Jesus did, the which, if they could be written, every one of them, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Amen." And so John is not giving a complete 100%, kind of account of every single thing, every single sign, and what Jesus did. He is picking out the ones that are important, that flow with His theme, that can demonstrate to the reader who Jesus Christ is. Because He says, if I wrote everything, it'd take the whole world, and in truth, if you take all the books that were ever written about Jesus Christ and the Gospels and put them in one room, well, it'd probably fill the Smithsonian or something, It's just so many. And so John is very particular and very careful about he spends. Now, if I was writing this book, I like to go into details. I'd probably write every little thing all the way through, and every little incident, and he stopped here and he went here, but that's not John. John wants to give us this broad view. So today, we're going to pick up on the first sign, and of course, the first thing a person does is always important. Usually the first and the last, The first time you meet somebody, they make an impression on you, and sometimes that sticks, and a good impression or a bad impression can last for a long time. And then there's always the last thing. And when I do funerals, oftentimes people think of, and I'll ask them, think of the last time you saw this person. What were they saying? What did you say? And you often remember that. What's the last thing mom said or dad said before they passed away or whatever? Or where were we? Those kind of things are important. So today we're going to look at the first part of this and look at the first thing that Jesus Christ did. And we'll take a look at this and apply it, and then we'll move on. This week is actually the first sign, but it shows his power. And there's actually in this chapter 2 evidence of his power. One is this one, and the next one is power he shows in the temple, his authority over the religious system. And so that will be next week. So today it's his power over creation and his proving his divinity, and next week his power over the religious system and the fact of his authority. So let's stand up and read it, if you will, with me as we read through this section. And I'm going to go back and forth between the two sides. We'll start with verse 1 on this side, verse 2 on this side, and then we'll all read verse 11 together. So if this side would start with me on verse 1. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. And both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does that have to do with us? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were 6 stone water pots set there for the Jewish custom of purification, containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." So they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it to him. When the head waiter tasted the water, which had become wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to him, "Every man serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then he serves the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." And everyone together with me on verse 11 and 12. Let's sing them all together. "This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went to Capernaum, he and his mother and his brothers and his disciples, and they stayed there a few days." May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. You may be seated. And let's take our Bibles and look here at this particular chapter and verse. If you'll take a look there. There are 5 important observations to note in today's passage. 5 observations. So if you take your paper out, it has a place for you to fill in the blanks there. Be sure to fill in the blanks. And if you keep all these notes, you could, some year if you're studying John or teaching John someplace or just want to study at your home, you'll have it so you can go on through. The first thing observation that I think is important is that Jesus endorsed marriage at his first miracle. Jesus endorsed marriage at his first miracle. And you'll see some of the signs up there of marriage. The one on the right is one, and I was surprised to find it here because I thought, I guess it's not original by me. I don't know if I heard it someplace or what, but I use it almost every wedding I do, which isn't a ton, but whenever I do them, because this triangle, I think, really exemplifies what a marriage should be. On the left and the right, we have the husband and the wife, and then at the top, we have God. And if God is not a part of a marriage, it is flat. It's a straight line. It's really hard. But if God's a part of the marriage, it should be successful. Oftentimes, and I do counseling with families, and there's Christian families that are falling apart, and I just understand it. But a lot of times, the problem is the 2 people are not going towards God. One person's rejected God, one's going off their own way, one's decided to put themselves ahead of things. But if God is really the focus of marriage, and as each person draws closer to God on this triangle, guess what? They draw what? closer to each other, don't they? Yeah. Because as each one moves up the triangle, you get closer to each other. And so as we move further away from God, we get further from each other. So it's important to have God as a focus in our marriage. And Jesus Christ, whether intentionally or not, he picked a wedding to be the first place he performed a miracle. And oftentimes people and commentators and preachers and so forth will draw attention to that because it's so important that he affirmed support for the marriage right at the beginning of his ministry. Now, the invitation was given, it says in here, to Jesus and to his disciples, and probably came through Mary. We don't know what Mary's job was here, but did she know the family? Cana was only a few miles from Nazareth, actually 8 or 9 miles from Nazareth, where they grew up, where Jesus grew up, so she may have had connections there. If you remember back to last week, we had Nathanael was the last one that he met. Nathanael lived in what village? Well, come on, take a guess. Cana. Cana was his hometown. Own place and mention, okay? So the last guy he invites or becomes a disciple, he's about 25 miles, maybe about 20 miles, I guess, south of Nazareth, where his hometown is, at John's baptism. This is what we think it is. And now he winds up, it says, 3 days later at Cana of Galilee, which is, we think, again, these are places that are not discovered yet, and we kind of have to go with what we think and the terrain and so forth. We think it's about 8 or 9 miles north of Nazareth. So you've got about a 25 to 30 mile walk. They did this in 2 days, which is probably about average. You know, you consider you got sandals, you got 4 or 5 guys walking along, you got to eat, you got to sleep and so forth. So it took about 2 days to make the trip. 3 days after the baptism and calling Nathanael, they wind up in Nathanael's hometown, and Mary is there, and she and Jesus and the disciples and Jesus' brothers, they've all been invited to this wedding. And so they all show up there together. Some think that Mary, since Jesus and the brothers were involved and so forth, that it was maybe a relative of Mary's. You know, she had some relatives there. Maybe some postulate, and it doesn't say that, maybe it was Nathanael's wedding. I don't know. Could be. We're just guessing at that point. But all these people have a connection. And of course, Nathanael living in Cana, even if he wasn't getting married, he probably knew the person because it wasn't like a big metropolis. And so there's connections, and these people know who it is. And so they walk up to this wedding. And if you look at the wedding, we're kind of guessing because it doesn't tell us who the bridegroom is, who the bride is. You know, it doesn't tell us, who the bridal party is, the best man. It doesn't tell us any of that stuff. Because what's important to John? Jesus Christ. The fact that he's at the wedding is the important thing. So he doesn't go into a whole lot of details about the other attendees or who happens to be there. And they all become unimportant. When Christ has his proper place in any story, everything else is secondary. And the same thing's true in our life. If we make Christ really the first place in our life, everything else is kind of secondary. I mean, it should be. And because things will go better if we have Jesus Christ running things than us. Some people come to, I talk to people sometimes and they'll say, just things aren't going that great, or I get into a situation where they've fallen away from the Lord, they're doing things that aren't right. And I say, well, how's that going for you? How's it going with you running your own life? And a lot of times it's not going well, and they need to put Christ back at running their life and put him first. With him first, everything's not easy. But I will tell you, it won't be going south like it would be if you're trying to run your own life and trying to take it the direction you want it to go. So trust in God, and if you think that that's a question, wait till the end of the sermon, because the theme that I'm going to suggest today, I think helps us realize that when Jesus Christ is there, things go better. So we need to make sure we have him at the right place. So anyway, that's what I find here. The one other thing that I think is a little, that I want to just mention is Jesus Christ in the Bible is described as in the wedding relationship as what? What is the church called? The bride of Christ, and Jesus Christ is the bridegroom or the groom. Sometimes the Bible says bridegroom. And there's many places where it describes Jesus Christ as the bridegroom and the church is the bride. In fact, if you look at Ephesians 5, where it says, husbands, love your wives, and wives, submit to your husbands, and all that whole thing, that whole passage there, we come to a verse a little later on in Ephesians, and Paul, at the end of that particular discussion, says these words in chapter 5, verse 32. He says that I speak of Christ and the church. I really don't think it was Paul's intention in Ephesians 5 to tell husbands and wives how to live. I think it was his intention to tell the church how to live with Jesus Christ. Once we have that straight, then we'll know how to live as husbands and wives. But he said, husbands, love your wives. Wives, submit to the husband. And we say, well, what's all that about? And we get all upset about, oh, I'm a wife. I don't want to submit to my husband. I'm the husband, and I don't, and I'm not sure if I'm loving my wife. Oh, you don't love me. We get all this kind of stuff going on. But we get to verse 32. It says, it's really a demonstration of Christ and the church. How do we relate to Jesus Christ? So if we really want to say that, well, I'm the wife because I'm the bride of Christ, the church, and I don't want to submit to Jesus. Why would I want to submit to him? We're equal, right? We both call the shots. He's trying to use the illustration of the home to make a point about the church. And Jesus Christ is the bridegroom, and the church is the bride. Now, he doesn't go into a whole lot of teaching here in John about it, but I just think it's interesting that him being the bridegroom and the church being the bride and so forth, that it's a nice illustration when we see that his first miracle took place at a wedding. That theme seems to be there. And we need to submit ourselves to Jesus Christ, trust him to give us the right kind of guidance to go through our lives. Because when we block him out of our lives, as the illustration on the right up here shows, a marriage goes flat. I'm not saying that nobody that is saved, the people that aren't saved have horrible marriages, not necessarily. But it doesn't mean that they're focused on Jesus Christ. And in the end, the marriage won't count when they're in heaven or in hell. What matters is, what do we do with Jesus Christ? So Jesus endorses marriage at his first miracle. The second thing I found that I think is important to note in this section is in verses 3 through 5, and that's that Jesus establishes a new relationship with Mary. And as we look at verse 3, it says, and when the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, they have no wine. Jesus said to her, woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour is not yet come. And his mother said to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. I find some interesting things here. This is one reason why some people think Mary was more of an assistant. She wasn't the head waiter, but, let's face it. If your friends get married, and their best friend's mom is around, she's going to get in there somehow. She's going to help to do whatever she can, and that's Mary. Maybe she had an official position, maybe she didn't, but she knew the wine was going. Now, the typical person's not going to be looking for that kind of stuff. But Mary, she saw that, so she may have been an assistant. She may have had some official part there. But the note was, what did she say? They have no wine. Is that important? Well, it's in the scripture, so I think it's probably important. I think some people who try to display and try to say, oh, Jesus Christ wasn't a miracle worker, and all these things were just, stories and whatever, they'll say, well, you know what, the wine wasn't all gone, and half the barrels were filled, and they just added water and watered it down a little, so it was a little bit, that's how we made the wine. No, they had no wine. It was all gone. It was done. So there wasn't any kind of trickery here where, part of it was there and part of it wasn't. There was no wine. It was out. Then we find that he says to her, woman, which is not really a derogatory term. To us it sounds derogatory, like, woman, what do I have to do with you? It was more or less, it was a formal greeting, like in the Knights, my lady, It's woman, lady, woman, what do I have to do with you? It was a term of respect. But it wasn't mom. It wasn't mom. And as we look here, it says that there's a new relationship, I think, that Mary's got to realize. Jesus is now in ministry, and it's no longer, mom, how you doing? Or mom, do this, or son, do this. It's, woman, I'm going to respect you, my lady. What do I have to do with you in this? Why are you asking me about the wine or mentioning that to me? So it's a term of respect. And it kind of puts a little bit of a better understanding of those that would say Mary has some special place of being able to, intercede between God and us and so forth. Jesus said, no, you were my mom, in essence, because the cross, he says also woman. He says, woman, my lady. He says, John's going to take care of you, Joseph being dead by that time. Very respectful, but the relationship of, 10, 11, 12, 15 years of age, hey, mom, is not what's going to carry at this point in time. And then he says, this, my hour, has not yet come. My hour, the hour, this is mentioned 7 times in the book of John. So it's very important when he talks about the hour. He's looking at a special important time that he's doing things. Now I want to backtrack for just a second to that word in the beginning of verse 4, in verse 3. They have no wine. And guys, I may need some help with here. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one kind of picks this thing up. But she says, they have no wine. My question is, women, why don't you tell us what you want us to do? Any other guys feel that way? You know? Just say it. Say what you want. You know, I mean, she could have said, could you give us more wine? Could you make some wine? Could you do something? No, like, they have no wine. You know, most guys say, oh, that's an interesting fact. They don't have any wine. Some stupid wedding planner didn't plan well enough. You know, I wonder where the nearest grocery store is. You know, maybe they should send somebody. No, they have no wine. You know, if you want to make wine, say, let's make wine. You know, it's kind of like, you know, boy, the dishes didn't get done today. How about that? What's that mean? You know? Oh, the trash didn't get put out today. Or, you know, you're sitting down and, boy, a cup of coffee would taste good, don't you think? Well, yeah, well, you want to get me one? You know? That's not intended, you know? I mean, women, just say what you mean because us guys don't get it, okay? Just saying, okay? Fortunately, Jesus Christ was God, so he understood what she was saying, I guess. But it doesn't always happen with us. They have no wine, okay? Well, what do you want me to do about it? And he knew what she intended, but we don't always get it. So women, if you want to keep your marriage, such as we talked about in verse 1, going well, say, please, could you give me a cup of coffee, or would you mind giving me a cup of coffee? Don't say that, oh, it'd be nice to have a cup of coffee, you know? Tell us, right out. Got it? Okay? Guys, if you agree, clap. Okay, some agree, okay. Women, raise your hand if you do that to your husbands, or to your you do that? Yeah, okay, some of you admit it, yeah, okay. At any rate, they have no wine, you know, and she says, okay. He says, what do I have to do with you? And then it's interesting, too. He says, what's he say to her? What have I to do with you? My hour has not yet come. So what's he basically saying? In a polite way, it sounds like he's saying no. And what does she say? Does she listen to him? Just blows it right off. Guys, whatever he tells you to do, do it. You know, it's like, he just said he wasn't going to do it. Or he wasn't interested in doing it. It wasn't his hour. She turns to the servants. By the word servants there is the word deaconoi. It's the same word that we use for deacons in the church. They were the waiters of the servants there. It says, whatever he says, do it. Well, I don't know. Sometimes we're like that, you know? I mean, it's just like, who cares what this person says, you know? This is what I'm saying. And he responds. Jesus Christ responds. I don't know if his hour all of a sudden came. If this conversation was put in by John to demonstrate the relationship between he and his mom and the fact that it's starting to change now, or that he still really did honor her even though the relationship wasn't mom anymore, but he knew there was a need and he knew he could provide it. I guess one of my questions is, how did she know he could do that? You know? I mean, what was she thinking? I don't know. But she had confidence to say, whatever he tells you to do, do it. She knew that he could handle this. I'm not sure what happened prior to this, but the thing was, do it. And I will tell you, I don't know, I guess if someone else if I'm in a wedding and the groom's mom says, Gary, do this, I'm probably going to do it. I'm probably not going to give a lot of guff if I'm related in some way. You know, so she tells these servants, do something, and they're going to do it. But you know what? The command is for us also, I think. When Jesus tells you to do something, what? Do it. Do it. Did they ask questions? Did they doubt? Did they wait? We'll find out in the next section as we go on to it just very next, but they did it. You know, when Jesus gives you a command, she is saying, when Jesus gives you a command, just do it. And that's what we need to do. When Jesus tells us something in his word, don't complain. Don't try to say, well, maybe he meant this or maybe he meant that, you know. The word of God is plain and simple most of the time. And if it's complicated, there's plenty of other passages or people that can help you understand it. But when Jesus asks us to do something, do it. When he says, go ye therefore and preach the gospel to every creature, say it. Do it. When he says, go, do it. When he says, give, do it. When he says, love your wives, do it. Don't ask questions. Don't try to get out of it. Just do it, Mary says. And so then we come to the next section here in the third observation. This is Jesus turned the water into the best wine. The picture on the right is of grapes there. The picture on the left was actually, I actually took that picture out in California when I was there at Fort Hunter Liggett. And we'd have to go from places to places. And I was just amazed how many vineyards they had. At the time we were there, they weren't full with green and everything else because we were there at the season of the year when it was still kind of winterish, I guess. But just look at that hillside. I mean, just the whole thing just filled with vineyards, with vines that would grow the grapes. And Jesus Christ here in this section, it says that there were 6 jars there. Each one, and if you look in some translations, it actually says 2 to 3 firkins. In the New American Standard, it actually gives us the actual gallons, converts it for us. It says 20 to 30 gallons. And if you take this 20 to 30 gallons per jar and multiply it out, you're going to come with, say 140, 150 gallons of liquid that these jars could hold. And so the purpose was for ceremonial cleansing. They had washed their hands. Remember the Pharisees kept on telling them, wash your hands before you go to the, eat and all this kind of stuff. So they had this around to do that. And then it says in verse 7b, Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. But there's so many applications here. I mean, not intended, but subliminal applications. When God tells you to do something, do it all the way. What's it say in the book of Mark? Do you remember that? Where it says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, so soul, mind, the whole works, just push it all into it. Excellence. You don't do a job halfway for God. When Jesus told them, they filled them to the brim. And I think in the John story, it's also important because, again, he didn't want them saying, well, they filled them halfway and they poured, good wine in afterwards or something to change it over. These were totally empty when they started. They filled them totally filled to the brim with water, and then they poured out what was left in it. No chance for error. They filled it to the brim. I don't know if you remember back in some stories back in the Old Testament, Elijah. Do you remember Elijah? The flour and the oil were running out. And if you want to look it up, it's in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 14 to 16. And he said to the widow, make me, a little meal first of all, and then make it for you and your son. And as long as the famine was there, she would pour oil, and it just kept on filling up. Never went dry. The miracle of doing what God wants you to do. And then there was another story, King Joash one day, and this is Elijah also. And the text for this one, actually, if you want to look at it, 2 Kings 13, and it's verses 18 and 19 is actually 2 verses. But Elijah's about to die, and he says to Joash, shoot an arrow. And so he shoots an arrow. He says, now take the arrows you have left and bang them on the ground. And he banged them 3 times, and Elijah got mad at him. He says, why'd you stop banging them? He says, now you're going to conquer and you're going to win a battle 3 times. Why didn't you do it more? 5, 6, 50, 100. I mean, you can tell him all those things, but I mean, you stop too soon. And for us with God, don't stop too soon. Do things with excellence. Go all the way. Ken was talking about 16 hours a week. I don't know any of you that would say I can spend 16 hours a week if I'm working a full-time job and everything else. But the question is, can we work time? How much time do we spend? Do we have time to spend it for one measly service, an hour and a half? Do we have that kind of time on a Sunday, plus travel? How about a life group? How about other ministries? Don't do things halfway. Don't say. A lot of Christians say, what's the minimum I can do and get by, right? Some workers do that also, don't they? What's the minimum I can do and not get fired? But as Christians, that shouldn't be it. It should be like Elijah talking to Joash. Don't stop at 3, keep on going. Don't fill them just halfway, the jugs. Fill them all the way to the brim. Do everything all the way for God. Never only go halfway for Jesus. They didn't have any questions. In verse 8 it says, he says, now draw some of the water out and take it to the head waiter. Now, can you imagine what these people are thinking? You've just filled these pots with water. I don't know if they heard what Mary said. I don't know if they were intending, they thought it was going to be intentional. Maybe they thought they were just taking some water to the head waiter. I don't know what they thought. And I don't know when it turned to wine. I don't know if it turned to wine as it hit the bottom of the container and they filled it. I don't know if it turned to wine when they were filled to the brim. I don't know if it turned to wine after they dipped it out and as they were carrying it to it. We're not told those things. All we're told is they were out of wine, it was filled to the brim, and he said, take it to the waiter, to the head waiter. Now, if you're one of those servants who is supposed to take it, I'm thinking, I'm about to lose my job. Maybe my head, yeah. These guys are not going to be happy when I give them water to drink. They were probably as surprised as anybody when the head waiter tasted it. And it tells us in the next section, and this is verses 9 and 10, the fourth observation, Jesus' first miracle is confirmed by the head steward, verses 9 and 10. God doesn't make junk. It says in verses 9 and 10, it says, when the head waiter tasted the water which had become wine and did not know from where it came, but the servants who had drawn the water knew, the head waiter called the bridegroom and said to them, every man serves the good wine first. When men have drunk freely, that which they have which is poorly, that which is poorer, you might have kept the good wine until now. Most people serve the good stuff first. Then when people start getting a little tipsy, their palate's not quite the same, then they serve the cheaper stuff and hoping the people won't notice. So you start out with the best stuff, first impressions, and then keep the secondary stuff till later on. He said, you've done the opposite. You saved the best wine until last. And the thing is, why it's so important that the head waiter confirmed was the head waiter did not know where the water had come from. As far as he was concerned, there was still more wine left in the barrels. He didn't know it was gone. And they brought it to him, and he thought it was just the best wine ever. So it wasn't that he was tipped off and said, hey, Jesus just changed this water to wine. Why don't you make him look good? He had no idea. He said, this is the best stuff. Now, some years ago, especially it used to be popular, people would say, oh, he just made grape juice. It wasn't real wine, I disagree. I think this was the best wine around. It was the best stuff because God doesn't make junk. And God made each of you, and God doesn't make junk. He makes us differently, but he doesn't make junk. Each one has a purpose, and God has given us that purpose. So never put yourself down. But Jesus Christ made the best wine possible. Now, I don't want you to go on and say, oh, well, that means I'll go out and drink as much as I want, and there's not a problem with that either. I don't think that's right. I mean, and one of the reasons why I think this is the best wine, and I'm not going to go into this whole, but if you want to read, I'll give you two verses. In fact, I think they're in your passages there. Luke 1:15 and Luke 7:33 and 34. It says that John the Baptist's father was told, you will not drink any wine, because it was a Nazarite from birth, basically, I think. So so John the Baptist drank no wine. Later on in the second passage I gave you, which is in your notes there, the Pharisees made fun of Jesus because they said, John came as a one who never drank any wine, but this Jesus character is a drunk. Now, he wasn't a drunk, but they were making fun of him because he drank. Now, you don't say that someone's drinking, and call him someone that, what they actually call him. It says, a gluttonous man and a drunkard. And he stays with tax collectors and sinners. They were just trying to make him look bad. But the fact that he drank wine that had alcoholic content, I think was right. And in that day and age, with water being the problem that was often what took place. It wasn't maybe full wine that we know, but I talked recently to a medical missionary, and they said, we could solve most of the medical problems overseas in these foreign countries if they had clean water. It's dirty water. And if you see the water that some of these people are drinking, some guy up the creek peeing in it and then comes down the street and somebody's drinking from the same water, you realize where the dysentery and all these other kind of problems come from. And they said, if we just go out, in fact, one of the folks that Lois and I support that was a friend of Jonathan's, he's down in Haiti, and he tries to put solar panels in for orphanages and uses those solar panels to try to get well water, to get clean water. Because if you can correct the water problem, you'll probably correct half of the medical problems. And such was true back in this day and age. To get good, solid drinking water that was pure like we have the privilege of having was not easy. So, at any rate, John drank no alcohol. Jesus Christ would. But don't let that think of you giving out. In the Proverbs, and I have, if you go to the next one, there are 4 verses here that I'll point out, and you can read them up here. It says, do not look on the wine, this is Proverbs, when it is red, when it sparkles on the cup, when it goes down smoothly. At the last, it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Sounds like Muhammad Ali, doesn't it? Proverbs 31, 4 and 5. It's a warning for kings not to drink, because if they drink, they will forget the decrees they've made, and they'll pervert justice. Leadership. When it talks about elders, it says they should not be addicted to wine. And for deacons, it says they should not be addicted to much wine. So it's not an open end, just go ahead and drink. And I'm not going to go into it, but if I could go into all the disasters and all the problems in the United States due to alcohol, it'd be incredible. My advice is, don't drink it at all, Just, why tempt yourself? Why get to the point where you someday will enjoy it? I enjoy stuff. If I enjoy a cup of coffee, I might have it for a week or two. I'm too lazy to make it for myself, But if I go to a restaurant and they offered, $2.99 for all you can drink, I might have 5 or 6 cups. It tastes good. I paid for the whole pot. Might as well drink as much as I can. And it'll probably be the same way, frankly, with the wine. So I just have never touched it, really. It's just something that's not worth hassling over, and we should do the same. But that's not the main point here. The main point is that Jesus Christ showed his authority over the creation. How often does water turn into wine? Huh? Once. How about this? Every day. Water, rain comes down, comes up the vine, goes into the grapes, turns into wine. Happens every day. But in this case, it happened instantaneously. And this is the only time. You're right. And the fact that Jesus Christ had access and authority over creation, and something that normally takes months or years, he could do at the moment, at the drop of a hat, showed that he had creative powers and that he was the master of creation. In 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, one of my verses I like, you've heard of this probably, one day with the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. God doesn't live in time and space. To us, it says it takes how many hours or how many weeks or months for water to turn into wine naturally. For him, it's instantaneously. He doesn't live bound up by time. For Jesus Christ to do it in a second was no different than doing it in 3 months or 5 months. He lived with us, but God does not live with time. And then lastly, as we close, Jesus' relationship to his disciples and his family was important. And I'm not going to go in a lot of place here, except that it says that his disciples believed. When they saw what took place, it says, he manifested his glory and his disciples believed him. He had these brand new disciples he just called 3 or 4 days earlier. Now they come and see him turn water into wine. All of a sudden, now they're believed. Now they're understanding who Jesus Christ is. And it'll take a little while for them to get the full understanding, but they're really getting the understanding of who Jesus Christ is as they go through this particular process. And it says he went with his family also. It says with his brothers and his mother. And there are some faith groups that say that, Jesus Christ had no brothers. They believe that Mary remained a virgin the rest of her life or whatever. Not true. You can look at the scriptures. In fact, some of his brothers, James and Joseph and Simon and so forth, are mentioned by name in the scriptures. But it says in John 7:5, they didn't believe. So I think this would have been kind of an interesting 2 or 3 day vacation that he takes here in verse 12. Can you imagine spending 2 or 3 days with your disciples who now believe in you? Your mom, who you just called woman and just had you turn water into wine even though you said you weren't going to do it, kind of thing. And then the brothers who don't believe you're there, who grew up with you. But Jesus is my big brother, my big half brother, whatever. Can you imagine the conversations that would have gone through? I just wonder what Mary said to him. I wonder if she was thinking back when he said those words back to his birth, when it says she pondered all these things in her heart. During those 2 or 3 days, a lot of stuff took place. But those relationships were important, and he spent the time with them. The theme, write this one down. Jesus can fill our every need when things seem impossible. They needed wine. That was the instance here. But there's lots of other stuff in our lives. It seemed impossible. It was gone. And they made it look impossible. The wine was gone. They filled it to the brim with water. But Jesus can fill our every need when things seem impossible. Dear Lord and Heavenly Father, we thank you for being with us. We thank you for this great illustration in John, which teaches us that you are the Creator God and that Jesus can fill our every need. Even when things seem impossible in our lives, we might not know where we're headed. We may not have enough financial resources for something. We may not think we have the knowledge for something. We may not have the capacity in some way to accomplish something, but let us always remember that you can fill that every need. In Jesus' name, amen.